Ladies and gentlemen, on December 21st of 2023, Deniq Ingram, a new mother, got up in the early morning hours to pump for her child. She went out into the living room or kitchen area of the apartment that she shared with her child, a baby named King Maximus, and the defendant, Larry Ingram. When she went out there to pump, she filled a bottle, but at some point, the defendant called out for her 3 times, "Babe, babe, babe." Little did Deniq know that when instead of responding vocally to the defendant, instead of saying, "Yeah, what is it?" little did she know that when she instead just went back to her room, the room that she shared with her child and the defendant, she was signing her death warrant. You're going to hear that previous evening, December 20th, the defendant, Deniq, and King Maximus were home. That the defendant and Deniq watched a basketball game, Lakers and the Bulls, that they watched some other TV, and eventually they fall asleep in their room. The defendant knew Deniq was there. The evidence is going to show that the defendant knew that Deniq often got up in the middle of the night to pump. And the evidence is going to show that at some point the defendant is woken up because he hears a bang or a crash or something like that. Now you're going to see pictures of this apartment. It's a mess. There's stuff everywhere. The idea that somebody might trip, especially in the middle of the night, in the dark, wouldn't be surprising. And you're going to hear that the defendant then calls out for Deniq 3 times. Babe, 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 something along those lines, and doesn't hear anything. And the defendant checks, sees that his baby is there, notices Deniq is not there, and instead of poking his head out, seeing if she's pumping, as is normal, he instead reaches across the bed, looks for Deniq's purse where he knows a gun is. He grabs the gun, and then he waits in bed. He doesn't turn on the lights. He doesn't warn, "I have a gun." He doesn't say, "If you come in here, I'll shoot you." Nothing like that. He grabs the gun, and he points it at that doorway, and he waits. And the moment he sees a person come through, he fires. Now you're going to hear that the defendant, yes, after he shoots Deniq in the chest, that he will go turn on the TV to get a little light, and he hears her cry out, and he does. He goes and he tries to save her life, and he fails. By the time police get there, Deniq is all but gone. You're going to hear the 911 call that the defendant makes. You're going to hear the dispatcher asking him what's going on. Who shot her? You're going to hear his first response, "I don't know. I don't know." And they ask him again several times. He'll answer other questions. He won't answer that question. Who shot Deniq? Now, who was Deniq? Again, she had a child with the defendant. And here she was the mother of his young child, King Maximus. They called each other husband and wife, although not sure that they were ever actually married in the ceremony. She was also his stepdaughter. She was also a witness in a prior case. And you're going to hear one of the charges is violation of a protective order. Not only should the defendant not have been shooting at Deniq Ingram, he should have been having no contact with her whatsoever under the law. Now, you're going to hear again that the defendant, yes, was remorseful. Sure, absolutely he was. He didn't want to kill her. You're going to hear that he tried to save her life, that he performed CPR, that he was confused. You put pressure on a chest wound, you pack a chest wound, but he tried to do what he could, and he called 911. You're going to hear that...
Objection. May we approach?
Yes. Was Mr. Ingram remorseful? Sure. Did he try to save her life? Sure. Does that change the recklessness of his behavior in shooting somebody who had every right to be in that apartment? Who had every right to go to her bedroom? No. Doesn't change the recklessness of that act. And at the end of this case, the state's going to ask you to find the defendant guilty of murder for killing Deniq in a reckless way, in a way that disregards the value of her life. The state's going to ask you to find the defendant guilty of violating that protective order. Again, recklessly killing someone he wasn't even supposed to be having contact with in the first place. The state's going to meet its burden, and we ask you to find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the defense giving an opening now, or are you going to reserve?
We're going to do it.
All right, thank you. You may proceed.
Are you afraid of the dark? Of things that go bump in the night? Larry Ingram was. He knew the bump in the night was coming. He didn't know when, but he knew it was coming. He'd been told several times that the bump in the night was coming for him, that something would happen. Then, on December 21st, he heard it, the bump in the night. Up until this, Larry Ingram had been balancing two big factors in his life. One was the love of his life. The other was the threats against them. Larry was at his happiest, at his most relaxed with Deniq. They understood each other like no one had understood them before. They had big dreams. They wanted a whole parcel of kids, a dog. They were going to get a farm in Arkansas where the kids and the dog could run and explore. And they also had threats. When they first moved to Wichita, they started getting phone calls. Sometimes the voice was male, sometimes it was female, but it always made threats. Something's going to happen. Someone was after them. So they moved. They chose an apartment at the back of an apartment complex so that there would be lots of people around. They tried to live in the present. They had a baby on September 11th. They dreamed big dreams for him too. So they gave him a name fitting of a great champion, King Maximus. Deniq worked as a CNA. She was sometimes called in for different shifts, but she worked nights. That was kind of the rule, that she would work nights. This was during COVID, not at the worst of it, but she was still an essential worker as a CNA, and she usually worked nights. It was coming on Christmas. Larry and Deniq were focusing on their small but growing family. Within their family, things were great. Their biggest fight that they had was about the British baking show. They never went to bed angry. But the threats didn't stop. While things were great in the home, things outside felt unstable and unsafe. Larry was constantly being told that the bump in the night was coming for him. Then tragically, devastatingly, on December 21st, the two factors he was balancing collided. Inside his home, his safe space, Larry heard a bang. It woke him up from a deep sleep. He was terrified. He'd been warned that something was coming for him. Deniq wasn't next to Larry in the bed, but that wasn't unusual. She worked nights. Larry called out for Deniq, "Babe!" And he waited. And there was no answer. And then he called out again, "Babe?" And he waited. And there was no answer. Then he called a third time, "Babe!" And he waited. And there was no answer. He was scared. He was terrified. He was sure that Deniq was not in the apartment. She worked nights, And if she had been in the apartment, she would have answered. Still, there was the bang, and it was in his home. And it wasn't just himself he had to protect now. There was his much loved, much wanted, much wished for child. The innocent 3-month-old who Larry and Deniq had so many dreams for. So Larry defended himself and his family. And he shot the intruder. But then, when the lights came on, his whole world crumbled. All of those dreams evaporated. It wasn't an intruder. It was Deniq, the love of his life, the partner in building these dreams that he held so dear. Larry jumped to do everything he could. He started performing CPR right away. He called 911 while still doing CPR. He asked 911 if he should pack the wound or if he should compress it while he's still doing CPR. And then came his shock, his disbelief, his grief, his praying, his anger, and his bargaining. Why couldn't it have been me instead? I would give anything for it to have been me instead. It was the worst night of his life. And that's what brought us here. And now you all have the very difficult and solemn job. You have to listen to the evidence. Remember who has the burden of proof. It's the state. Remember what that burden is. It's beyond reasonable doubt. And remember that presumption of innocence that sticks to Larry Ingram like duct tape. These are the pillars of our justice system. At the end of this trial, we will ask you to return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.